So if you recall on one of my slides, I talked about one of the problems being that we know engagement is effective and helpful in research, that there's so many benefits to it, but it's only a small percentage of research studies, both within pain and outside of pain, that actually include engagement. And so it was actually advocacy that led the NIH to initiate the ENGAGE initiative. We as patients and people living with lived experience went to the NIH and said, why don't we have more of a unified approach to incorporating engagement across research studies? And that was effective, and they launched the ENGAGE initiative in October of 2023. And so ENGAGE stands for Engaging the Public as Partners in Clinical Research. And I was pleased with Sue Bakken to co-chair this initiative. And we were charged with the task of developing an agency-wide vision and framework for incorporating patient and public engagement in all phases. So as Jessica was just talking about, from the very beginning to the very end, and all types of NIH-funded clinical research. So just quickly wanted to point out that our work group members consisted of about 25 plus people who represented a broad range. So we had patients, we had advocates, researchers, clinicians, and nonprofit representatives here. So this was not like a closed group of just scientists or clinicians that were coming up with this, or people from the NIH, but it really included a broad perspective on our working group. And we also went around the country and did a series of public-facing events called community conversations, where we actually talked with diverse populations to get their input and feedback on this and to incorporate it into what we developed through ENGAGE. So just a little bit about our process. In phase one, we really mapped out as a work group our vision and approach to meeting the deliverables that we were charged with from the NIH. In the second phase, we developed those draft products. And as I just mentioned, we had what are called community conversations, where we went across the United States and had consultations with groups of people from diverse communities to get their input. And then we used that input to update the deliverables and draft our recommendations to the NIH. And then finally, in phase four, we finalized our report, our products, and our recommendations, which is the stage that we're at right now. So this is a 50-page report. I'm going to give you the link to it at the end. I would encourage everybody to take a look at it. There is a shorter executive summary in the beginning if you don't want to read 50 pages, which is totally understandable. But I did want to just share some of the outcomes of ENGAGE with you today. And the first is the vision and goal for clinical research engagement that we adopted. So the vision really was a future where engagement becomes standard practice. So instead of, a small percentage of research studies that are actually incorporating engagement, every study includes engagement. And that would promote responsiveness to community needs, accountability, and transparency of the research process while helping turn discoveries into improved health. And that last piece is the mission of the National Institutes of Health. The goal of this was for people and communities to influence the agenda and direction of, as well as have meaningful input into research that's relevant and impactful to them. And again, that goes back to what I was talking about earlier, nothing about us without us, right? So we want to have a role and meaningful input into research and what comes out of research. So this is the framework that we developed, and again, refined with input from the public. And what it is, the circle represents is the stages of a research life cycle. So from the very beginning with stage one, where you're trying to identify what research questions you might want to answer, all the way to developing the research question, planning it, carrying it out, and then sharing the findings. But this specifically talks about or exemplifies how communities or people with lived experience play a role in that entire research life cycle. So in the center, you can see that there's 4 different entities represented. One is the community, and that could be a community organization, a community itself, if you're doing a study within a certain geographic region. It could be a group of patients, it could be caregivers. There's a variety of different people who would qualify as community, but just think about it as lived experience perspective. Of course, there's the researchers, there's the funders who provide the money to carry out the research, and then research organizations like academic institutions or others that Janelle's mentioned earlier in the presentation that are involved with helping to carry out research or hire people who are researchers. So I'm going to go through each little piece of the framework one by one, just to give you a better idea of what each one of these represents. So the first part of the framework is to identify health needs. And the objective of this stage is really to articulate the community's health needs, or the people with lived experience, what their needs are, and why those needs are important to improving health. So the typical way that this is done is that researchers actually just come up with the questions that they want to study and that are interesting to them. They don't necessarily go to people like us or broadly into the community to hear their perspectives on what kind of information or data they wish they had in making more informed decisions about their healthcare. So this kind of really changes the research paradigm, where instead of a researcher doing this him or herself, they're first going into the community to find out what's important to the community members. So each engagement objective has action steps along with it in order to accomplish that objective. So the two action steps for this stage are: one, the ongoing and consistent collection and assessment of community health needs by researchers and communities or people with lived experience. So the idea here is that you don't just go into the community one time, get information at one time point, and then leave and go conduct the research. But this is really an ongoing discussion because things change, right? New research is done, new findings are published, so this should be done on a consistent basis. And second is for researchers to really understand the importance of our health needs, right? So not just like, why are we, or what are we saying that we want, but why? Why is it important to us, and how would it impact our lives? The second piece of the framework is to set or develop the research question, and the engagement objective here is to undertake a shared priority setting process to match community needs and evidence gaps to create the study's research question. So I'm sure you're already thinking, like, there's 1,000 questions that we may have, and there's so little data out there right now in terms of pain research to help us make informed decisions, that there's probably a very long list, between any conversation that takes place between researchers and community members or people with lived experience. There's going to be a very long list of things that we wish we knew, and that we wish we had in making informed decisions about our healthcare. So that first step is really about developing that list, right? And identifying all of the things that we wish we knew or that we would like. The second step is really about prioritizing which ones, because we can't answer every question in one single study or even a set of studies. So we have to come up with a way to prioritize which ones we're going to address. So this first step involves together, researchers and community members prioritizing which ones that which questions or which needs we want to push to the top of the list. Once we have that short list, then the next thing that would happen is to clarify the evidence gaps and possibilities for research. So this step really involves saying, okay, well, we have our lists, right, of things that we really want to study or really want to know. But the secondary level is, well, what's already out there? Have these research questions already been studied quite a bit? Is there a lot of information, let's say on question 1 and 3, but not necessarily on 2 and 4? And so it's really to look at that list, then to look in science and see what we know and what's being studied. And that helps us to, again, prioritize which areas we want to look at. And then after we use that information, we can draft the research question. But importantly, now we also need to know what funding opportunities are out there, right? The reality of the situation is that researchers rely on funding agencies and the priorities that funding agencies put forward in order to get grants to be able to conduct their studies. So we may have those 5 questions, and now we've identified 3 that have risen to the top, but now we need to take those questions and look at NIH and PCORI and other nonprofit organizations and see whether they have funding opportunities available that could potentially address that research question in a study. So once all that has taken place, We've developed our list of priorities. We've prioritized which ones rise to the top. We've found funding opportunities that are out there for which we could apply for grant money. Now, the next stage in number 3 is to actually co-plan the research together. So the objective of this stage would be to co-design a study that's aimed at answering the questions that we came up with, the research questions. And here it's really important for community members who are partnering with researchers to agree on what their roles and responsibilities will be on the research team, and to have a decision-making process in place that will kind of guide that partnership across conducting the research study. And then, if necessary, to develop study or role-specific training to the community partners and researchers so that everybody has the solid foundation for being able to participate and partner together. And then really here, the goal of having community expertise or expertise from people with lived experience is to take a look at the study design and co-design it together so that we're improving the quality of it, we're making it more patient-centric, and we're making it more feasible. Next, in the 4th step, we're going to be carrying out that research. So the objective here would be to conduct the clinical research study together to gather the evidence that we're seeking to get from the research question. Here, the action steps are to monitor the study progress for community centeredness and fulfillment of responsibilities. Oftentimes, studies come up with different obstacles as they go on. For example, we're not recruiting enough people to participate in the study, or the protocol is clunky. There's just a lot of different things that happen in research, just like in everyday life, where we address obstacles. So when you have people with lived experience who are on your study team, they can help researchers inform kind of study modifications to address those obstacles and barriers. And then once we have enrolled everybody and the study has been completed, once you have your data, then researchers and people with lived experience or community partners would co-interpret those results together, because researchers and people with lived experience are going to have different perspectives on what we find. And finally, in the 5th step, we are going to share the findings together. So instead of researchers just writing a paper and publishing it in a scientific journal or going to a meeting and presenting it to their colleagues, we're really looking at sharing the findings more broadly with communities. And the objective here is to collaboratively together return those research results back to the people who participated in the study, the communities of focus. So for example, if it was a study on fibromyalgia, we would want to make sure that we're getting it out into that community and clinicians who treat fibromyalgia, patients who suffer from it, scientific audiences, and the broader public. So again, think about those end users of the study, anybody that could potentially use the findings of this study. And the action steps here are to co-design tailored plans to return those results to those parties that I just mentioned, to then work together to co-create what those dissemination products would be. So in addition to a scientific journal, it could be a one-pager, it could be an infographic, it could be a short video explainer, it could be a podcast. There's just so many different ways to disseminate information these days. And then the 3rd action step there would be for researchers and community members to co-communicate those products out through multiple channels. So we would be doing it together. So for example, myself as a community partner, I might be with a researcher on a podcast where we're talking about our study and what we found, or we might attend a community event or a scientific meeting together and co-present the findings of that study. So I don't have time to go through all of this right now, but I did just want to mention that we included a section on preparing for engagement, because just like any other partnership that we enter into in life, it is important to prepare yourself. And the reason why engagement can go wrong a lot of times is because researchers and people with lived experience aren't prepared to enter into this partnership and work together. So the 4 main areas that we addressed and provide recommendations around in the report are how to establish partnerships between community organizations and researchers, how to fairly compensate people with lived experience as valuable members of the research team, how to establish roles and responsibilities and expectations of all the partners who are on the team, including people with lived experience. And then again, as I just mentioned before, about how to deliver training right? So we're not all going to come to the table with the same level or amount of information. Researchers may need training on engagement. People with lived experience may need training on research and how it works, right? So they have a better understanding of it. And then finally, again, don't have time to go into all of these recommendations in depth, but the end of the report are four key bold recommendations that we made to the NIH on how they can make this engagement framework standardized and meaningful across the NIH and within NIH-funded clinical research. So I invite you to take a look at that report and those recommendations. So where are we? The report is done, and we presented it to the NIH director at the end of September. Unfortunately, the government shut down a couple of days later, but that doesn't mean that this is over. The current NIH director, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, is a big supporter of engagement and publicly stated that he's committed to advancing community engagement in clinical research. And that he looked forward to fully considering the report and creating a meaningful plan for implementing these recommendations across the NIH. So I invite you to read the report. You can scan the QR code or visit the link that I put on the screen. And if you have any questions about this or just want to be informed on kind of what happens next, you can always reach out to me via email or visit the website on the NIH server called partnersinresearch.nih.gov to keep abreast of things.